Welcome to Better Life Conversations. You know, one of my favorite things about what I do is getting to hear stories. And the realization that I have is that everybody I engage with, everybody I talk to has a story. You have a story. The other day, I had the privilege of sitting down at a table with some people I didn't know, and I ran into Robin Wills. And Robin was there sitting with me, and she started sharing her story with me. It's a powerful story, and it's a story you need to hear today. It's a story about forgiveness. It's a story about Jesus, and I'm going to let her share it with you in her words. Robin, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's just such a pleasure to have you here, and I just want to get into it. You have a story, a testimony to share. Tell me that story.
Well, my husband and I had been at my parents' home in Calistoga, California, and for my dad's birthday, and it was on a Saturday night, and we left the house. I guess it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and as we walked through my parents' garage out to our pickup, 82 Datsun pickup, he says to me, "I'd like you to drive home tonight because I'm really tired." And I said, "Well, I don't really want to, but I will." And so by the time we got through the garage to the front of the pickup, he says, "No, I'll drive." And I thought to myself, he never changes his mind like that.
So that was kind of unusual right then.
Very. So we get in the car and heading back to Santa Rosa, and it was probably 15, 20 minutes later as we were going along a stretch of road where we went around one curve to the left and the other one would have gone to the right, but there was a little straight stretch. And here comes these headlights, and they were weaving back over the center line. And I thought, oh no, this is it. My lights went out, and so did the pickups. And the next thing I knew, I was shaking my head as if to clear my mind because I could hear some tinkling of glass. And the creek, which was on our right side of the road, was now on my left. And so I thought, I need to get the flashlight out and check out my surroundings. And so I reached forward to the front where the glove box was, but it wasn't, it was wires. So I thought, we must be upside down. So I drew my hands down below, and I felt for the glove box, and I pinched it, the latch open, and thank God it wasn't jammed, so everything fell on my lap. And I was able to get the flashlight, and as nurses do, they checked the time, and it was 10 after 9, or 20 after 9. And I didn't think about my husband yet until he spoke to me. And he said, I hurt so bad.
Oh.
And that's how I knew that he was in extreme pain. And so I reached over to where the sound of his voice was, because it was dark, and told him that the paramedics would be showing up soon, so hang in there. And I didn't realize the position he was in until I put the flashlight on him. He was on his knees, his hands were over the back of the seat, and pretty soon, it was like maybe a minute or two, I saw this big light coming down over the side of the embankment. And so I called up there. There was 2 fellas. One said, "Is anybody down there?" And I said, "There's 2 of us. I think I'm okay." I hadn't felt any pain yet. And I said, "My husband's is in terrible condition." And so they came down. The guy said, "I'll stay with you until the paramedics show here." The other guy went up and I guess used his cell phone, made a phone call. So it wasn't long, and I heard the sirens coming. And so, in the meantime, I prayed, because even though I didn't know his true condition, I had a good idea as a nurse, and I realized that the truck was upside down, but I was in an upright sitting position, and he was in an upright position. And so I opened up the window, even though I knew it was already broken out, just to get fresh air. Yeah. And I thought, I need to get the keys out of the glove, out of the ignition. So I found where that was, and I said, now which way do I turn it? Turn it any way it'll go. Yeah. I did, took it out, and stuck it inside my underwear. And so by the time the paramedics got there, and they had to pry the door window frame down to pull him out, and they couldn't pull him. And I said, oh, wait just a minute, let me undo the seat belt.
So even though his seat, it sounds like it had been dislodged,
yes,
he was still buckled into his seat.
And so I reached down to my right to where the seatbelt buckle should be, and it was, and I unlatched it, and they were able to pull him out. And I got to thinking, if we're in an upright position, the truck is upside down, how is a seatbelt still attached to him across over his back? And the only thing I can think of is the angel tucked it there before his seat rotated inside the cab. And I was so thankful, because I realized the Lord had protected me, because that seat could have landed on me, crushed me, injured me badly, killed me, whatever. And so they took him out, and I could hear them working on him. And as a nurse, I could tell the conversation, this vein collapsed, that one collapsed, and I thought, he's not going to make it. And I knew that it's not up to us to decide whether a loved one lives or dies. It's up to God, but he's patient enough, and he waits for us to give him permission to do what he needs to do and let him go. And so I prayed that. I didn't want to have to, but I knew I had to. And so I knew he wasn't going to make it. And interestingly, well, I don't know if it was interesting or not, but when they got me on the stretcher, pulled me on the stretcher out of the pickup cab and set me in the back of the ambulance, I could hear the whirl of the helicopter, and I thought, well, that'll be for me. Yeah. And I purposely did not ask the paramedics how my husband was, because like I knew he wasn't going to make it. Just don't validate it. And I understand that's because our minds cannot handle trauma until later. And so it must have been about 15 minutes from the time the accident happened until the paramedics actually got there. So, fast forward a little bit to my brother had gotten the police report, and this was probably a month after the accident, which was in January of '88. And I read on there what time the accident was approximately happened. And that's when I realized I had lost consciousness. I was out for about 10 minutes. And it brought some things to my mind that, being that I had lost consciousness, I knew nothing of that 10-minute span. That when a person dies, they don't know anything. They don't see anything. And the first thing I thought after I came to was, I guess he hit us, the car headlights that were coming towards us and weaving back over the yellow line. And that spoke to me again that our thoughts will be picked up where they were turned off. The next thoughts we will have when we are resurrected will be what we were thinking. Except I wonder, when we're resurrected, we're going to be so glad to see Jesus, we won't even think about these instances. Yeah. But anyway, it gave me some insight to help people who don't quite understand that when you die, you don't go to heaven, and you're not up there watching all the horribleness that's going on down here. So anyway, I told my brother, who's older than I, that I wanted to go to the court when this young man was sentenced. So he said, okay, he would arrange it. So we went to court. Let me digress a little bit. In April of that year, I went to Southern California with the Pathfinder Club from Sebastopol Church. And during one of the talks, I don't remember if it was somebody else giving it or the lady herself, whose husband had been murdered by someone up in Washington State. And she went to visit him. And I believe she gave him a steps to Christ. But in her visiting him and forgiving him for what he had done, I thought, I have to do that. So before this first court date in April, 4 months after the accident, I took a little book with me, Steps to Christ. And being that my late husband was a bookbinder, and he was foreman at Pacific Union College Bindery for several years in the 60s, it was one of his first attempts at binding a book. And so I said to the DA, before the court had convened, I would like to talk with Tony, the young man that had hit us, and the DA, and myself, and my step-son-in-law, who was also an attorney. And he wasn't my attorney, he was just there for support. And so he said, what for?
Yeah, I think that would make them a little bit nervous.
I knew it was unusual.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, because I have a little book I want to give to him. Oh, okay. He says, well, right after the hearing's over with and we're finished, follow me and we'll go to the law library. So we did. He followed in first. Tony went next. I followed, and then my step-son-in-law. And up to this time, Tony didn't know the person that he'd hit. And he turned around, and we were like 3 feet from each other. And I couldn't help myself but just grab him and hold him. He was shaking like a little kid, not knowing what's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And I told him I forgave him. And I said, we make mistakes sometimes that are horrible. And I said, I have something for you. Because I had the book behind me and behind him.
Yeah.
And I said, this little book will help you deal with what you've done, and it'll bring you closer to Jesus. And he thanked me for it. And then we filed out, and I was there also for the next several. I guess he had another hearing and then a final one that was like May or June, when he was sentenced to spend a year in the county jail there in Santa Rosa.
So I want to go back to that moment though, where I struggle with forgiveness. Where did that come from? Because you know, a lot of times it's like forgiveness has to be pulled out of us, but you went and hugged him. Where does that come from?
I guess it comes from a mother's heart. This kid had just turned 22, 2 months before the accident. And I don't think it would have been much different if the person had been older. I just, it was the first time he'd had a DUI, and his blood alcohol was quite a bit up there. And I felt bad for him. I could tell by his demeanor in the courtroom, he was very sorry, repentful, didn't speak unless the judge spoke to him. And I just thought, this young man. But I told him, I said, I don't want him put somewhere where other prisoners could ruin him. He's got a life ahead of him. It was a big mistake, but he does need to follow through with so many hours of.
I'm struck by how we hear stories like this, right? And usually there's a sense of vengeance, where people are writing letters not wanting this person released or having it easy. It's like they want to take their pain and inflict it on this other person. Instead, what you're sharing with me is a picture. It's a picture of Jesus. It's a picture of the person who deserves all of these things, and instead of, you're wanting what's best for him. And it's lovely to hear that, because we don't hear that often.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home. My parents were baptized in the Adventist church when I was 4. And so I've gone to our schools. I've been exposed to the Word of God. Maybe not as much in my early years like I should have been, but enough so that I knew what the right things were to do. And when a person doesn't have a relationship with Christ or hasn't been exposed to that, you're going to get this revenge, get even, this anger. And even my oldest stepdaughter, she said to me one time when I was staying with her after the funeral and all, she says, "Aren't you angry with God?" I said, "Why should I be angry? Your father was ready to be put away, to put to sleep for a safekeeping until resurrection." I mean, those were my thoughts. Yes, I know the person grieving goes through an anger stage. But it seemed to have the wind out of those sails.
And it didn't stop there. So you wrote a letter, and then you continued engaging with him.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about that.
I found out from him, and I don't remember exactly how, that I would be able to go to the jail on Saturdays. And so every Sabbath afternoon, I went to go visit him to make that connection. And one Sabbath, I met his parents on the front porch of the building where the fellows would be coming into. And come to find out, they lived about a half a mile down the same road as my parents. And they were so thankful that I was able to reach out to him. And Tony even told me himself, he said, "You're coming to see me." I mean, it's been so many years, 36 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but paraphrasing it, now I'll be able to help my younger brother, who was 18, 19, and maybe I can help steer him away from what I got into. So from that time on, he was able to write to me. Oh, back up a little bit. When he was sentenced and he went into jail, his first letter back to me told me they wouldn't let him take that Steps to Christ book in with him. They wouldn't let him take any kind of a book. And yet he said, they have all this garbage material in here. And I says, no problem. I'll just make copies of the first couple chapters and I'll mail them in. He says, great. So I mailed them in, he read them, and he started some Bible studies while he was in jail using Steps to Christ. And so I was able to send him the whole book through the mail, and they accepted that.
Right.
And so towards the end, he was in only about 7 months out of the year because there were so many guys coming in. They had to move some of them out. And so I had shared with him that I was redoing the inside of my manufactured home, papering, wallpapering, new carpets, vinyl blinds, and so on. And he said, well, if I were out, I'd love to come and help you paint. And I said, well, there may be something yet to do when you get out.
Right.
As well as I said, would you, when you finish this book, would you like to have some Bible studies? He says, yes, I would. Let me back up just a little bit. He told me in one of his early letters, reading that book helped me to deal with what I've done. And it's also given me a better understanding of Christ because I was raised in the Catholic Church. I was an altar boy, and it meant nothing to me. But this little book has helped me a lot. In writing back and forth, I had told him what I had been doing, and I also had a problem with my record player. He says, I can fix that. When he was able to come, he put up all my mini blinds and the louvers at the sliding door. He fixed the record player in about 45 minutes. And when we got to the study of death and dying, I thought to myself, how is he going to handle this?
Yeah.
And he asked me, was John a Christian? I said, yes, he was. He loved to give Bible studies, and indirectly, he has brought you into a better relationship with the Lord. And we stayed in contact for 3 years. By that time, I think I moved somewhere else. He bicycled to a job, which was probably 5 miles from the jail in Santa Rosa, to his job, which was a clerk at a liquor store, of all places. But he never drank after that. He was a faithful employee, and the court had said that he had to pay me X number of dollars for the loss of the vehicle, 3 years of probation and community service, or I guess it was 5 years probation and 3 years of community service. He was faithful. I got a check from the county every month until the value of the pickup was paid off. He went to college, finished his education at Rohnert Park, at Granola U, they called it, because that was kind of during tail end of the hippie generation. And he graduated. And because he was so good on a saxophone, he traveled the world with the Tommy Dorsey Band. And you've got to be pretty good to go with that group.
Yeah.
We lost contact after about 5 years. But before that period came, I was able to give him a great controversy. And I said, this will broaden your spiritual journey even more. So, and I told him when we were studying the death and dying lesson, I said, I want to be able to introduce you to John. So I'm expecting you to be there.
Right. So, as life is, things happen, and we have choices to make. And you chose forgiveness, and it's remarkable the impact it had on him. What impact did that have on you?
Well, as Christ forgives us, then we can forgive others. I know a women's retreat one month, the same year, at Leone Meadows in Southern California. Kay Kuzma was the speaker. And at that time, I just had to share as much as I could share. And so I told her the story. And this was like Friday afternoon. She said, "Would you be willing to speak Sunday morning at our devotions?" I said, "Yes." And so I did. The first experience I've had in speaking to 500 women. But there were about 16, 20 women that came up afterwards and thanked me for sharing because it helped them deal with things in their life that they were struggling with. And because of my Christian background, my Adventist background in particular, I knew the ramifications and how it would spread if you share.
Right.
The testimony that what you have experienced, what the Lord's done for you, He will do for others.
That's right. In fact, at the beginning of your story, you mentioned that one of the things that prompted you was hearing about how somebody else had been in a situation and had shared steps to Christ.
Exactly.
So that influenced you just like you were able to influence others. As we close, forgiveness is something we all struggle with. If there are viewers right now that are having some issues with forgiving something that maybe in their mind is unforgivable, what would you tell them?
It brings a great sense of relief. And if we want people to forgive us, we have to be willing to forgive others.
That's right.
Doesn't mean that you forget what happened. It just takes the anger, the animosity, the vengeance away and brings you peace.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Robin, thank you so much for joining us. And
My
folks,
pleasure.
if you're faced with one of these moments right now, or if you've dealt with it in the past, share your story and take courage knowing that you're not alone in this and that Jesus is with you and will work through you as you engage in impossible situations that are only impossible without Christ. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Have a great day.